Salvatore, can you tell me what the meeting number is? Anyone tell me what the meeting number is?
I am not.
The meeting password? The meeting password.
I don't think there was a meeting password for this. I'm not on the community board. I'm just here to support some affordable housing.
Okay.
Mr. Puka,
Word is?
Mr. Puka,
Yeah.
the meeting
Yes.
password is, I hope you have a pen, 3,
Wait, I'm
the
gonna
letter
do it.
3,
I'm sorry, start again?
the letter 3, the letter 3, you hear me? The number
The
3, capital H is in Harry, capital P is in Paul.
Wait, hold on. Capital H, capital P.
M is in Mary, lowercase, capital P is in Paul, capital C is in Charles. The number 3 again, lowercase c is in Charles, 3 again, K is in kite, lowercase, the number 7.
Hang on. It gets me in.
You must be calling people now because some building the gap.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Good evening, all. Thank you all for coming.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. As you may know, I'm Ethel Tyus, Chair of the Land Use Committee for CBA. And tonight we are going to have 3 items to review. The first one up will be a ULURP application for 840 Atlantic Avenue. Then we'll have a presentation of Council Speaker Corey Johnson's planning together citywide rezoning proposal. And then we'll do a wrap up on city planning's initiative zoning for accessibility text amendment that was presented at a joint meeting of the EST and land use committees on the 27th. And I hope everybody's had a chance to read it. We tabled it because people hadn't had a chance to read it. So we'll wrap that up tonight. And I would like to keep the meeting as on point, as focused as possible. So at this point, I have to ask if Third Vice Chair Irsa Witherspoon is with us.
I'm here.
How are you?
I'm good. Hope all is well.
Good, excellent, excellent. And we have, I think we have District Manager Michelle George with us, obviously. So we will go into a roll call.
Yes, I'm here. Hello, everyone.
Thank you. Ms. Weatherspoon, would you call the roll? We have 2 excused members, Robert Callahan and James Ellis notified us earlier that they, Mr. Callahan will not attend and Mr. Ellis will try to attend. So those
Okay.
2 excused, yes.
Okay, great. Albert Appleton,
Here.
Mrs. Ben James, John Buckholz, Janet Collins,
Present.
Nora Daniel, Kevin Farley, Najani Granville, Kathy Iceland,
Present.
Cecilia Majornid,
Here.
Peter Crashes,
Here.
Sarah Lazor,
Here.
Sherry Norton, Fiora Ortiz,
Here.
Robert Puka,
Present.
Adam Sachs, Ethel Tyus,
Present.
Gib Vaconi,
Present.
Ursa Weatherspoon here, Sharon Weatherburn, Elaine Weinstein, Deborah Young,
Here.
Too short. So, let's try to make the best use of the time. We can,
Najani Granville, I'm sorry, she has just come on board. Najani's here.
okay, excellent. Thank you for coming, Ms. Granville. Still one short. I want to know if Ms. Levers from the City Council Speaker's Office is with us to present on planning together.
Yep.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Would you care to proceed with your presentation at this time?
Sure. That sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here twice. I really do appreciate you taking the time to learn about and listen to this proposal. My name is Annie Levers. I am the Assistant Deputy Director of the Office of Strategic Initiatives at the Council. So our division spearheaded the Planning Together report and legislative proposal that I'll be presenting here tonight. This is a bill. It's been introduced. We had a hearing in February, but that's just one of the many ways that we are collecting feedback. I am meeting with community boards all over the city, in addition to other stakeholder groups, to provide information, answer questions, and most importantly, hear feedback and thoughts in any form you see fit. So we have no timeline for passing this bill at this time. There's no clock that you all need to adhere to with respect to providing opinions. And community boards are really participating and providing input in lots of different ways: formal resolutions, informal conversations, working groups, etc., emails, direct emails to me, phone calls. So you can really treat this as an open conversation. And with that, I will share my screen. If I can, let's see. All right. So with somewhat limited time, I am not going to spend a huge amount of time walking you through these key issues, and will instead direct you to the report that we put out, which goes into great detail on each of these, citing a lot of great research and resources. But in short, the city's planning mandates, in our opinion, are insufficient, they're scattered, they're confusing, and this really leads to inefficiencies and a lack of coordination between city agencies. Our planning regime is purely reactionary. There are very few meaningful opportunities for communities to proactively plan for their futures. And instead, we're really left reacting to irresponsible development in our neighborhoods and individual rezoning applications that are usually already fully baked by the time they reach the community board or the council. The city often really does nothing to support the creation of proactive 197A plans, forcing communities to find the resources or the funds themselves, to pay the consultant or front the cost of environmental review. And even where communities are able to find those funds and put the plans together, the city often outright ignores them in future rezoning decisions, even where really good 197A plans are in place. So the city's sort of piecemeal, project by project approach to rezonings has exacerbated inequality. The budget is rarely, if ever, connected to our broader policy or land use goals. And our budget decisions are almost entirely divorced from assessments of capital infrastructure needs, which are totally insufficient. So in response to these issues, the council started working on a proposal for comprehensive planning under the direction of Speaker Johnson during the 2019 Charter Revision Commission process. So the speaker was supportive of implementing comprehensive planning through that charter revision process. And when the commission did not take up the issue, we continued developing a version of the proposal that we could adopt via local law. So the proposal that I'll describe here tonight is designed specifically to center issues of equity, access to housing, sustainability, and resilience within the full range of policy, land use, and budget tools to better achieve our citywide and neighborhood goals. It's also designed to enhance public participation in the creation of those goals to ensure we're meeting the unique needs of each community while tackling citywide challenges. So right now, any given mayor could come into office in 2022 and set citywide goals in line with their electoral agenda. So that mayor could say we need to generate an additional 500,000 units of affordable housing or whatever it is, without any real rationale for how that number was chosen, what kinds of housing we're hoping to produce, or opportunity for public input. So this proposal would implement what every other major city in the country and really the world uses to set those citywide goals, which is comprehensive planning. So this proposal creates a process for communities to proactively weigh in to prioritize the issues that we see affecting our neighborhoods over and over again that may never be prioritized by a given mayor because it doesn't align with their electoral agenda. It would set citywide and neighborhood-specific goals in partnership with other elected officials, community boards, community stakeholders, and members of the general public, instead of leaving that all to the mayor as it is right now. And it would really try to flip the script on individual ULURP applications from the city and private developers. So right now, we're really stuck reacting to proposals that, again, are usually fully baked by the time they reach us. This bill would create a proactive process through which you all would create a proactive plan that developers would be required to react and respond to, rather than the other way around. So the first thing to note, which I sort of already mentioned, is that comprehensive planning is extremely common. New York City is a real outlier. Every other major city in the country engages in some form of comprehensive planning. But for decades, New York City has repeatedly abandoned attempts to require comp planning or engage in it in favor of our ad hoc project-by-project approach, despite the fact that comprehensive planning is now widely accepted as a best practice, especially for tackling the climate crisis and really integrating sustainability into all aspects of urban governance. So some might argue that, the way we do things right now works just fine, sort of muddling through one project or neighborhood at a time. And while that approach may have gotten us through the last century, a piecemeal approach to combating the climate crisis is just going to be a disaster if we continue on with this piecemeal approach to dealing with the fact that by 2100, all of our coastal neighborhoods are going to be underwater every single day at high tide. Our housing and homelessness crisis is only going to get worse with climate change. 80% of the housing units in the current floodplain are affordable housing, and 28% of those units are NYCHA units. And even in the shorter term, unemployment rates are through the roof, small businesses are suffering, and we really have no clear path or strategy to creating more accessible, high-quality jobs for the New Yorkers who live here right now through our land use and budget tools. And we have this backlog of capital needs that grows by billions and billions of dollars every single year as our existing infrastructure degrades. But we have no rational or equitable system for prioritizing what needs to get fixed first and in which neighborhoods, let alone deciding what new infrastructure actually needs to get built and where. So before I go any further, I want to spend a minute clearing up some facts about what the proposal does and does not do. So it's a really complicated 25-page bill that basically splits open the charter and pieces it back together again. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of misunderstanding and confusion around exactly what it does and does not do. So what it doesn't do is make or require any amendments or changes to the city's zoning resolution whatsoever, nor does it create a zoning czar. It does not require or trigger requirements for any kind of rezonings, let alone upzonings ever. It does not amend or eliminate community boards' role in future rezoning decisions, and it does not eliminate single-family zoning in New York City, nor does it propose any specific rezoning actions whatsoever. What it does do is requires the city to provide community boards and the public with new resources, data, and analyses to support proactive community-based planning. It encourages the city to direct any new growth or development away from low-lying areas that are vulnerable to sea level rise and other displacement risks like rising rents and real estate speculation. It identifies and prioritizes communities' urgent budget needs, regardless of whether or not those neighborhoods will be rezoned, which I would say was the #1 demand of the coalition that we're working with that has been advocating for comprehensive planning for many decades. And finally, it gives all neighborhoods the opportunity to proactively plan for their futures and preserve what they love about their neighborhoods. So the comprehensive planning framework is designed to be this shared proactive vision for the city's future across community stakeholders, city agencies, elected officials, New Yorkers those elected officials were elected to represent. So the comprehensive plan itself would be informed by all of the various inputs that you see on the screen. So these factors will all look very different from neighborhood to neighborhood, which is exactly why this proposal focuses purely on process reform and does not propose or support any specific zoning changes because recommendations need to be customized and responsive to the unique needs of each neighborhood. So in every neighborhood, we'd have to consider principles of equity and justice to correct existing and historical neighborhood disparities, ensure the equitable distribution of resources and development, climate and displacement risks facing our city as a whole, and especially for the neighborhoods already bearing the impacts of climate change today, community input to lift up, preserve, and enhance what communities love about their neighborhoods and prioritize their vision for change, all while meeting these citywide goals. So measurable targets for the jobs, resiliency, infrastructure, affordable housing, open space, transportation, arts and culture, public health, everything we need to fit into the city in order to support thriving communities over the next 20, 30 years. A robust physical needs assessment would inform those citywide goals. So really for the first time, examining all of the city's existing infrastructure and repair needs and the urgency of those repair needs as they compare to each other across our neighborhoods, identifying serious disparities. Neighborhood history, including an examination of the actual impact of recent rezonings and development decisions in our neighborhoods to assess whether or not the city's on-the-ground development decisions are really achieving their intended long-term policy goals. And then finally, neighborhood needs. Again, what are the budget needs of our communities as they stand right now, regardless of whether or not we expect those neighborhoods to grow or change, so that we can prioritize those first and foremost in the city's budget process. So these are really standard and common features that comprehensive plans all around the world use to inform their process and that we've explicitly built into the legislation. So the framework streamlines and meaningfully connects the dozens of reports and plans and documents that are already required by the city charter, often without any opportunity for public input at all, while creating and strengthening new resources for communities to use as they proactively plan. So all the documents that you see on the left side of this screen exist, they're already produced by the city or by community boards in some cases, the district needs statements in here. And while they could together be conceived of as a comprehensive plan of some kind, the charter fails to make clear whether or how they're supposed to relate to one another or connect. On the right, you'll see the depiction of the news cycle, which would connect all of these disjointed documents, processes, and reports to build one citywide strategic framework and vision. So it would start with community boards' district needs statements, which the charter will now make clear should directly inform the city's budget planning documents. The DNS would then inform the production of a new conditions of the city report, which would feed into the citywide policies and goals, which would inform the city's long-term plan, and then ultimately our budget. So each document would build on the last. The charter would also require new milestones for public engagement before and after the production of each of these documents, which I'll walk you through later in the presentation. So the framework is designed to lay a solid foundation for good proactive community-based planning work to get done by setting clear timelines and milestones and well-defined roles for each of the stakeholders you see on the screen. Sorry if you can hear my dog. That time of the evening, she wants her dinner, but she should settle down in a minute. So the Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability is an office that already exists. It goes by the name, the Mayor's Office of Sustainability right now. That office is currently responsible for putting out the Plan NYC reports, or the One NYC reports that come out every 4 years. But the plan that they put out doesn't require any meaningful public engagement or council adoption. So this proposal infuses new requirements for formal public review and council adoption into the city's existing planning framework to sort of democratize that plan and the process through which it's put together, bouncing it off all of these various stakeholders throughout the planning process so that we can build consensus and adopt something we all agree on. A new long-term planning steering committee and borough steering committee would help set the city's goals. I call them new, but they actually already exist, and they advise on the One NYC report that the city already puts together. So again, we have all of these committees. That committee in its current form has 39 members, 37 of which are appointed by the mayor. So we're rethinking that body to be more democratic. It would be a much smaller body of 13 people that would be appointed by a mix of elected officials to actually inform the setting of our citywide goals. They'd be technical experts, and they would form these more diverse borough steering committees, which would be intended to reflect the pure diversity of each borough and then inform their decision making and setting those goals. Community boards and borough presidents would play an ongoing role in putting that plan together by adopting recommended land use scenarios, which would then come to the council for review and adoption, just as 197A plans do now. Those frameworks would essentially set the vision for what future land use applications would get measured against. And then finally, the CPC would play an ongoing role in the review and certification of ULURP applications, just as they do now. But now they'd be required to measure those ULURP applications against what's in the long-term plan. So now I will walk you through the process. So we've tasked that Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability to be responsible for coordinating across city agencies to get all of this planning work done. The city's first task would be the production of a first of its kind conditions of the city report in coordination with communities and city agencies. That report would take all of the data that currently sits across dozens of reports and plans in the open data portal and put it into one easy to use place. It would revive the charter's requirement to actually produce a zoning and planning report, which is the only report that has ever required the city to regularly review the city's zoning code to identify challenges and decisions that produced unintended consequences when compared to their stated policy goals. So Bloomberg eliminated that requirement in 2012. Our proposal revives this requirement and brings it back into this conditions of the city report, which would be produced once every 5 years. It would also include new analyses, including a physical needs assessment, which I mentioned, to assess the state of our current infrastructure for the first time in a really comprehensive fashion, in addition to 2 new indices that Seattle uses to measure access to opportunity and displacement risk. The city would then work in partnership with communities and key stakeholders in that long-term planning steering committee to determine the city's long-term needs for housing, jobs, open space, schools, and other critical infrastructure. And those would really be measurable targets. So then through a public engagement process, New Yorkers would help decide where and how the city would distribute that critical infrastructure in their neighborhoods over the next 10 years, prioritizing any new projected growth where that is identified as a goal, which it won't always be, in areas that have high access to opportunity. So they have the infrastructure already in place to accept growth with respect to schools and transportation and access to jobs and et cetera. And areas that have lower risk for displacement risk. And that would look at eviction, rising rents, speculation, construction activity, literal displacement risks with respect to climate change, so sea level rise, et cetera. So we would actually map out those areas and say, if there is growth as a goal of this plan, it should be directed in the areas that have high access to opportunity and low risk for displacement. Community boards and borough presidents would participate throughout the process, but would specifically be required to adopt preferred land use scenarios for each of their relevant community districts. So the city would be required to produce 3 potential land use scenarios in the draft plan as resources to help New Yorkers envision different scenarios and priorities for the future. That's a standard feature of comprehensive planning processes all across the country. It would really just ensure that the city is doing some of the legwork that communities usually need to pay a consultant for to actually draw up the land use plan. But those 3 scenarios that the city drafts up could live and die right there. They could be thrown in the trash, and you all could start from scratch, draft up your own land use scenarios, or dust off an old 197A plan, perhaps never got off the ground or was adopted and needs updates, and adopt that as your recommended land use scenario. That would get sent to the council, and the council itself would also be empowered to completely draft up new land use scenarios from scratch. They would not be bound to the ones that the city produces as a draft. And they would actually be responsible for reconciling the council would reconcile recommendations from community boards, various stakeholders, the general public, and ultimately be responsible for adopting the final preferred land use map for inclusion in the final long-term plan. Then those land use scenarios would set the vision for our neighborhoods, and we would measure future rezoning applications against those plans. So ULURPs, everything would still go through the ULURP process as it does now, but they would be required to include a statement of alignment, which would just describe how the aligns or conflicts with what's in the long-term plan. So all rezoning applications would go through ULURP, just as they do now, but with these new resources to inform your decision-making processes and recommendations. So the production of the plan would take place over the course of 4 years, from the appointment of the steering committee to the adoption of the final long-term plan. The graphic on the left here outlines the points at which the bill will mandate public meetings, adoption of formal recommendations, and council adoption. Community boards would be enabled to participate in every step of the process and would be specifically required to make those formal recommendations on the land use scenarios. And we essentially required some form of public engagement before and after the production of each formal document in the planning process, from the conditions of the city report to the final long-term plan. And again, many of these documents exist in some form and are produced without notice to communities and without any opportunity to inform their content. So these are really intended to be viewed as baseline minimum requirements for participation required by law. They provide important milestones for the purpose of public transparency, but they're also flexible to allow the cities to sort of grow and adapt that community planning process over time and provide different types of resources to different neighborhoods as needed. This depicts the full 10-year process, including when each document will be produced and the update and amendment process, which would start about halfway through that plan, that 10-year period. So after the first cycle, the cycle starts over again. It's really as much about the process itself as it is about what's in the final adopted plan. It would create this ongoing forward-looking conversation about infrastructure that you need in your neighborhoods and goals that you're setting and how you're seeking to achieve those goals through not just land use recommendations, but budget and policy recommendations as well. And each plan would really try to build on the last. Compliance with the long-term plan with respect to zoning would be encouraged and considered, but not required. So all rezoning actions, as I have mentioned, in furtherance of the plan or not, would still be subject to ULURP. Future ULURP applications would be required to include this statement of alignment describing how the rezoning does or does not align with the long-term plan. And then community boards would entirely retain their role in the ULURP process, but with this new data and resources assessing neighborhood needs to inform your decision-making processes. The proposal also makes significant reforms to our long-term infrastructure planning to ensure we're really spending our limited resources wisely and equitably. So unlike the Plan NYC or One NYC reports, the final long-term plan will be required to include detailed budget needs for meeting citywide and neighborhood-specific goals down to the community district level, including dollar amounts. The 10-year capital strategy would be reformed to reflect the full scope of our infrastructure repair needs and a wish list of the new infrastructure that we have to build in order to achieve our citywide goals. And then annual budget documents would prioritize those needs based on more robust assessments of our infrastructure and disclose where the city is choosing to fund infrastructure or projects that were not identified as a priority by communities in the actual plan. They would be required to explain themselves, and we could use that in our budget negotiation process. So that's, the presentation that describes the proposal overall. We think that this holds a lot of opportunity for the city as a whole and individual neighborhoods by laying the foundation for better proactive community-based planning to get done by meaningfully connecting the city's budget, land use, and strategic planning processes, providing new resources and data and analyses to support proactive community-based planning, identifying and prioritizing communities' urgent budget needs, regardless of whether or not the neighborhoods will be rezoned. So that was, again, the number one demand of the Thriving Communities Coalition that we're working with, where there's a sense that the communities that have been recently targeted for rezonings have been sort of forced to accept growth and MAH upzonings in exchange for the long overdue investments that they've been asking for decades. And this really sort of flips that script to say that we need to be doing this proactive infrastructure planning in every single neighborhood on an ongoing basis, regardless of whether or not you're going to be rezoned. And then finally, it would really force the city to do, that's not finally, but it would force the city to regularly review and recommend updates to its zoning code in line with best practices to address unintended consequences and sort of where infrastructure issues have been created, where additional growth was created, where they weren't expecting it, or where there's need for additional open space or sewer capacity or whatever, school seats, etc. And then finally, forcing more coordination across city agencies to better achieve citywide and neighborhood goals. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. I can pull up slides to answer anyone's questions, but I just will stop sharing so I can see all your faces.
Thank you for your presentation. That was most informative, and it's very serendipitous that you are back tonight when we're doing a ULURP item. Thought that was a strange coincidence, but here we are. I would ask Ms. Weatherspoon to select questions from the chat. I do see one from one committee member, Buckholz, that we could start with that.
Well, Mr. Buckholz, can you go ahead and ask your question?
I'm just curious to understand. There are a lot of popular ideas about what causes displacement, and it's an academic debate. So without wanting to weigh in on one side or the other, what are the empirical standards, or what's the research that's been done that will inform this? It sounds like we're talking about a lot of speculative theories, and I'm just curious if the council has decided proactively that certain things are associated with the risk of displacement, or if that's an open question.
Sure. So you are correct that it has been found by academics and organizers alike very difficult to prove a causal relationship between a given action and displacement of tenants. It's a really complicated thing to look at. Obviously, individual humans are very complicated creatures, and so it's hard to point to one specific factor, though you can, whatever. There are areas where it is very clear, but this is different. So this is not saying that we are going to be able to identify exactly what actions are going to cause displacement. This is looking at measuring the risk of displacement, which is obviously very related, but a different concept, right? So these, this is literally the text of the bill, so it's a bit wordy. This is used in lots of cities, and what I've included here are the maps from Seattle specifically, which is where this, I think, has been used most effectively in the context of their comprehensive planning process. And you'll see here that the indices or the data points that we're looking at to sort of predict risk of displacement are pretty common sense, right? So development potential, construction activity, median rents and rates of rent burden, housing market changes, including residential property sale prices, the number and share of rent stabilized tenants, eviction rates, employment and wage data, poverty rates, and projected climate change impacts. So this is what that sort of looks like on a map, right? You see the areas, it's a heat map where these factors are pointing to a higher risk for displacement. It's not saying that any one intervention or action is going to definitely cause that displacement, but these are the areas where displacement is most likely to occur regardless of what action is taken, if that makes sense.
Thank you. We have another question. What determines speculative activity in communities?
So the bill doesn't exactly define that, and I would welcome your thoughts on whether or not it should, or whether we should leave that flexible to grow and adapt over time. The coalition that we're working with is definitely looking at providing some feedback on how this index could get more specific. But with respect to speculation, I think what you would see is a lot of developers or real estate interests purchasing a lot of land in recent years and seeking rezonings that would increase the value that they can extract from that parcel.
Okay, so we do have a question. Thank you. From Ebony. All community in Brooklyn housing grounds got a input on the new change. Now, what about the low income tenants and their input?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question again?
Well, the concern is that basically everyone else has had an input except for the low income tenants, and when will their voice be heard?
In our development of this bill, or in the planning process as a whole?
Well, I would imagine the planning process in terms
Both.
of, yeah, or both.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. So I think one of the ways that we really explicitly tried to ensure that that everyone's voice would be represented, but specifically individuals who are low income, at risk for displacement, have been historically marginalized from planning decisions in the past, is by making sure that we have lots of opportunities for the general public to actually participate, not just existing stakeholders, elected leaders, or even community boards in a given neighborhood. And I think one of the things that we're looking at to strengthen this bill is how specific it gets with respect to the types of outreach and engagement the city will be required to do. I think this is one of those things that it's very hard to legislate, that just like making sure that outreach is robust enough to really reach the folks who may not have the time or resources to come to a community board meeting or even know about a planning process that's underway. But what we can do is list the kinds of activities that the city would need to engage in order to reach the volume of people that we need to reach and make sure their voices are heard. So in other cities, that looks like polling, literal phone calls, making phone calls directly to people, flyering, knocking on doors. In Seattle, they were literally knocking on everyone's doors and making sure that they had a face-to-face conversation with individuals that lived in that neighborhood before forming new steering committees that would help drive the planning conversation forward. So we're still getting that feedback, and we would really welcome additional thoughts on sort of what would need to occur. I think another area that we're thinking a lot about is the types of groups we could require the city to contract with who already have relationships in communities with respect to tenant organizing, or just tenant unions, et cetera, to really make sure that everyone's voices are heard. But again, this is an open conversation, and we would welcome your feedback on how we could strengthen that piece of it.
Okay, thank you. We have a question also here. What is in the plan that can ensure that high opportunity neighborhoods don't shirk their responsibilities to allow construction of housing and affordable housing?
So that is a central goal of comprehensive planning as a whole, and specifically what we have designed here. I think what we've done with respect to the adoption process specifically is based on not just what's worked well in other cities, but like academic research on what forces legislators to really work together. And instead of saying, no, not in my neighborhood, and sort of ending the conversation there, you're forced to negotiate with your colleagues in a way that doesn't allow you to simply say no in your neighborhood, because if you say no in your neighborhood, it's being shifted to somebody else. And so you really have to work with that dynamic and adopt something that, includes upfront investments that will ensure any growth that does get directed towards your neighborhood will be able to be supported by the infrastructure in place, whether that means additional school seats, et cetera. But by forcing the city as a whole to work on these projects together and these citywide goals, you really reduce a lot of the ability for individual neighborhoods or people to reject proposals outright, because if they reject it outright, they cannot have a proactive say in the plan. They really do, or they are forced to work with their colleagues, and that's what this is intended to achieve.
Thanks for answering. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So we're back at just really confirming and reinforcing that all voices would be heard. So the question has come about, how can the members of Community Board 8 be able to pass that information on?
To other people about this bill process?
Yeah, what you're speaking on, because the concern is still, because I mean, you mentioned about possibly adopting ideas from Seattle and other places, so you really can't confirm at this point how you want to have that information distributed. So it's still a concern. So the question is, what can we do as community board members in passing the word?
I would love to connect you to the coalition doing a lot of outreach education on this issue. I think that might be really a good way forward. I can connect you to a lot of the grassroots groups that are probably organizing in your neighborhoods already that are a member of that coalition, and that might be a good way to get people more involved. I am, all comp planning all the time. So you can, of course, direct people to me, or if you know of groups or individuals who would like the same presentation I'm giving here right now, I'm more than happy to give it. So I would welcome any suggestions that you have, and would welcome any meetings that I could have with folks in your neighborhoods to get the word out and hear their feedback.
Okay, could you drop your information in the chat?
Yeah, of course.
Contact. Excellent. I think we do have a couple more. Next up, when do you expect to have this bill be voted on?
So we don't have any plan for voting on this bill at this time. It would be really great to hear feedback, because I think that will help move the conversation forward in a really productive way. I'd like to make good use of the time we have to strengthen the bill and hear as many diverse voices as we can on it as we work with coalition to potentially make amendments. The speaker, when we introduced the bill, made clear that he would like to pass it before the end of the session, which is at the end of this year. But we don't have a set plan in place for a timeline for passage at this time.
Thank you
Okay,
very
thank
much,
you.
Annie. Are there other questions, Ms. Weatherspoon, so we can move on?
Actually, there are a few questions. We have a question from Cornelius Collins. What is the objective downside to the speaker's proposal? There must be one of the kind of planning process being proposed hasn't yet been adopted. The alternative was characterized as muddling through, but that's a straw man. So what would oppose this plan, prospective New York City mayors?
I think people think it's hard to change the way we approach our planning process. That's my personal opinion. I think there are a lot of perspectives out there. You can go back to the hearing and hear out sort of the administration. I was not particularly convinced by their arguments. I think that it's another example of New York exceptionalism, and that we are perfectly capable of putting together a comprehensive plan that's rooted in community input, as opposed to just, supporting whatever given siloed policy the next mayor intends to prioritize, which is what happens over and over again. So I'll just stop there.
Okay,
Thank you
thank you.
very
We have one final question. And I guess that would be it for this. From Peter Crashes, what does this proposal do to bridge state and city planning? This neighborhood is a good example of those two planning processes needing to be coordinated. There are 6430 units of housing in Pacific Park, including 2250 affordable units. Pacific Park is a state project and includes a good number of units in the study area of 840 Atlantic Avenue.
There's a lot of work to do on state and city coordination, as you all know, and I can't promise, I would never promise that this can solve all of those problems. But what it can do is at least make very clear what the city's priorities are for capital projects and infrastructure, so that we can get better coordinated on implementation with the state agencies that are doing projects in the same exact site on a slightly different timeline, which is why we see, you know, streets dug up twice in the same month, because the MTA and the DOT didn't talk to each other about what they needed to do. And by doing a lot of this upfront planning, especially on capital projects, I think we can significantly improve coordination between agencies by simply just putting it on paper, which is in a coherent fashion by neighborhood with a clear timeline. Like, that's a very basic first step that I think would significantly increase coordination alone.
Thank you.
Okay,
That was
thank you.
very informative. Ms. Weatherspoon, are we going to move on from here?
Yes, we have no more questions. So we can
Okay,
move
thank
on.
you for checking.
Sure.
What I suggest here is that since Ms. Levers is reaching out for feedback, I would ask for a motion from the floor on this item to accept or reject with conditions, without, to give some form of feedback for the time that she spent with us opening the meeting at 6:15. We've given this 45 minutes. Let's put a mark on it. I ask for a motion. Gib Vaconi is not moving. Oh my God, what's going on here? Peter Crassus. You're muted.
I would just, actually, my observation would be, I saw that Community Board 2 is having a presentation from Tom Angotti, which does present a counter view, and I think he's going to be addressing Community Board funding. So that's on the 10th. I would like to watch that since we haven't had that ourselves. So my own preference would be not to continue with a vote tonight, but that's my perspective.
Okay, let me remind you all what Ms. Lever said. This is not conclusive. This is going to be floating around for the next, how many months? 6 months, 7 months? So we can revisit this as we go along. So again, I ask for a motion to put some sort of shape to what we've heard tonight as a group. Is there a consensus in any way, shape, or form out there?
I would actually like to pick up on what Peter just suggested. Maybe there's an interest in inviting Professor Angotti to come and speak to Community Board 8, and so we can hear a different perspective.
Okay.
I think much of what was presented was very interesting, but it always helps to hear different points of view.
Okay, so you're moving for another speaker on the same subject from a different source. Is there a second for this motion?
Actually,
Seconded.
I just want to clarify. I was going to propose inviting Professor Angotti if he's already making the rounds to community boards in Brooklyn.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'd second that. Oh.
Okay, so for planning together, we're going to get another viewpoint from Professor Angotti.
And I do see the comment from Ms. Nazarian about, I know I've met Professor Angotti, and I know he has very strong points of view, and I don't always agree with all of them, but I'd still like to hear what they are in this case.
Okay, so we have a motion by Vaconi, and who was the second?
It was Sarah Lazar.
Thank you, Sarah Lazar. I'll call the roll. Ms. Weatherspoon, please.
Sure. Albert Appleton,
Yes.
Princess Ben James,
Yes.
John Buckles,
Sure, yes.
Janet Collins,
Yes.
Nora Daniel,
Yes.
Kevin Farley,
Yes.
Johnny Granville,
We can come back.
Kathy Iceland,
Yes.
Tazima Jordan,
Yes.
Peter Crashes,
Yes.
Sarah Lazor,
Yes.
Shari Norton, Fior Ortiz,
Yes.
Robert Puka,
Yes.
Adam Sachs, Ethel Tyus,
Yes.
Gib Vaconi,
Yes.
Kirsta Weatherspoon, yes. Sharon Weatherburn, Sharon Weatherburn, is that yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Elaine Weinstein, Deborah Young,
Yes.
Najani Granville. You can put it in the chat, Miss Granville.
Okay.
Is it, oh, I can hear you now. Is it yes or no or something else?
Yes. You can
Okay,
hear me?
thank you. Yes, I can hear you clearly. Thank you so much.
18.
We have 18 in favor
Thank you. And no abstentions and no
and
negatives.
correct.
Okay, thank you. So now we'll move on to the main item for the evening. Thank you again, Ms. Levers. And
Thank you so much for having me. Have a good night.
Thank you. Chair,
yes,
just before we move on, I just want to identify a few of the callers that are listed.
great.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you callers for joining us. Could you please identify yourself? First number 347, ending with 20. Star 6 to unmute yourself. Caller 347, ending with 01. Star 6 to unmute yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Aurelia Jackson.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Thank you. Caller 347, ending in 86. Please identify yourself, star 6. Number ending in 86, please. Star 6.
Hi, my name is Tanya Fleming.
Hello, Ms. Flemings. Thanks for joining. Thank you. Number 718, ending 00, please. Star 6 to unmute.
Jonathan Berman.
I'm sorry, you said Jonathan?
Berman.
Bourbon. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And the next number is 718, ending in 87, please. Star 6 to unmute yourself. Number ending 87, please star 6 and identify yourself. Thank you. Number 718, ending in 97. Could you please star 6 to unmute yourself and identify? Thanks for attending.
Elena Bruno.
Thank you, Ms. Bruno.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much. Okay.
You.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, and all of you. Go ahead, Ms. Chair.
Thank you for checking, Ms. Weatherspoon. A lot of the things people do trying to get over COVID and having folks call in and wondering who's in the audience. Can you mute the little baby, please? Somebody's got the baby.
Oh, I'm sorry. How you go back on mute? Mute.
That I don't have an answer to. Can you help out, Ms. Weatherspoon?
It's done, it's done.
Okay,
Just hit mute on your phone.
thank you, Ms. Princess Ben James. I appreciate that. Okay, so we look at what's happening with 960 Franklin. They're in court saying that what we're doing right now, virtual meeting, shouldn't count. So we need to try to perfect this as much as we can, because it is quite convenient not to have to trek to a meeting physically. At any rate, what we need to do now is move on with tonight's agenda. The ULURP item, 840 Atlantic Avenue, is with us and ready to make a brief presentation. This is the second, maybe third time we've seen this. I think it's the second time, really. They'll correct us as we go along. So we're looking at ULURP application C210-249 ZMK and N210-250 ZRK for 840 Atlantic Avenue, rezoning the blocks 1122, lots 1, 9, 10, 68, 69, 70, and 71. The presenters tonight, I believe, will be Benjamin Stark and his colleague, whose name escapes me at the moment.
Stephanie, thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie Razi. Okay, so if you guys have a show and tell, we'll do a brief one on that. And for this item, then we'll have a prepared response from a select committee member. And we also have the representative for Majority Leader Cumbo in the audience, Lucian Allen, and he can make a statement as well. And then we'll try to wrap this up so that it can be referred to the full board meeting on the 13th, next Thursday. And from there, it would go to the Brooklyn Borough President's Office. I believe Land Use Director for BBP is with us, Mr. Richard Barak. So we can toss this around and see what we can make of it. Please take it away, Mr. Stark.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tyus. Again, my name is Ben Stark. This is my wife and colleague, Stephanie Marazzi. We represent Vanderbilt Atlantic Holdings, a developer of the proposed building at 840 Atlantic Avenue. We've been before this committee a number of times. Some of this will be kind of backtracking, but this application would rezone M11 zone land that only permits a very low density commercial development, does not permit residential use at this location. And so this rezoning would permit a predominantly residential building. The rezoning would also establish an MIH area that would require forever in perpetuity units for low income households. The application would also amend the zoning resolution to allow for wider, more pedestrian friendly sidewalks. And as some of you know, this would be a redevelopment of the McDonald's site. So we're gonna go over right away some project commitments that we have to share, give a brief reintroduction, talk about some feedback, talk about M-Crown, and we're gonna move through all this faster than I think Ms. Tyus thinks we are. I promise we're gonna move quickly. So right away, we want to tell everyone that we have heard the concerns of this community regarding density, regarding precedent for projects that are coming behind us. And with that in mind, we propose, we want to share with you tonight that we propose to change our rezoning. We propose to map along Atlantic Avenue a portion of our site, an R8A equivalent zoning district that limits building heights to 145 feet, and most importantly, would establish precedent for the rest of Atlantic Avenue at that upper zoning limitation. We also, based on feedback from this community, are willing to commit to option one, a deeper level of affordability than the option two that we had previously discussed. And we have previously presented that this building will have a transformational 8,000 plus square foot community facility space for a local non-for-profit dance studio, Jamel Gaines Creative Outlet. We want to lock that space in perpetuity forever for a community facility tenant through the execution of a restrictive declaration. I know this community board is familiar with that process. So I don't need to explain what a restrictive declaration is. Where are we? Everyone is familiar with this. This is the McDonald's drive-through on the corner of Vanderbilt and Atlantic. Here we are, we've swung around to the Vanderbilt side, looking back up. This is a very underutilized property. It's adjacent to tall residential buildings, and this is a great location for housing, including affordable housing. It is a busy area, both vehicular traffic, pedestrian traffic. We are adjacent to wide streets, 120 feet wide on Atlantic, 100 feet wide on Vanderbilt. This is where a building of the proposed mass makes sense. We are also close to public transportation. I mapped it out. I know Mr. Crashes said that one time that it's a really far walk. Google has it at 10 minutes to a subway station serving a variety of lines, giving easy access to two of the largest central business districts in the country, and 3 if we include downtown Brooklyn. We're also a 3-minute walk to the Clinton Avenue stop. These connections, they're about access to opportunity. But the application for this building is also supported by the existing built context, the 312-foot tall building at 809 Atlantic, over 100 feet taller than the building that we propose. And I know this board doesn't like to hear about Pacific Park, but fight it as we might, that site across the street will someday be developed with a 300+ foot tall building, also will dwarf this proposed building in height by over 100 feet. And for these reasons that we just went over, the city's planners and urban designers agree that this site offers a unique opportunity to do something different than the balance of M Crown and, importantly, the balance of the south side of Atlantic Avenue. We believe this application is important. It's why we're fighting for more housing here, because of 2 things: opportunity and impact. Our team believes that there's a need for more housing, just like Annie had described a little while ago. It's about access to housing in high opportunity areas of the city, like North Prospect Heights. And to us, high opportunity doesn't just mean access to better schools, but it's about proximate access to employment opportunity. A resident in this building can look through the classified ads for a job, and there are thousands upon thousands of job opportunities within a half an hour of this site. If you're living in an affordable housing building in East New York, the access to opportunity is far less. This is where we need to build affordable housing. This is where we need to build housing for everybody. And it's also about impact. This building and the amount of affordable housing that's proposed for it will single-handedly provide an outsized share of the affordable housing units that are anticipated to be built in the M Crown over the next few decades. 840 Atlantic does this while still remaining contextually appropriate with the surrounding development. It's a full 100 feet shorter than buildings that exist or will exist across the street. And what is that impact? I know that some of you have seen these numbers. We were participants in the M Crown process. Oh, are we still sharing? Did we lose our screen? Yep. There we go. Let me just go back. We were participants in the M Crown process over the last few years. Numbers were thrown around. What actually will the M Crown, a neighborhood-wide rezoning of M Crown, yield for the city? Estimates ranged over a build horizon. A build horizon is decades, that anywhere from 600 to 850 affordable housing units would come out of the M Crown process. This application at option 2 would yield 95 affordable housing units. So anywhere from 75 to 95 affordable housing units would come out of this process. That's 8, 10, 15% of all the affordable housing that the M Crown neighborhood rezoning was ever expected to yield. Let's put that into context. The Gowanus rezoning that is currently snaking its way through Europe is anticipated to yield 2,500 units of affordable housing. In fact, there's 950 affordable housing units proposed for a single development at Gowanus Green, also next to a subway station. We're 3 minutes from a subway station. So just giving some context to what 600 to 800 affordable housing units across an entire M-Crown area looks like in relation to some other neighborhood rezonings. So given all of that, we heard the feedback over the last few months. We heard two things primarily. We heard a number of things, but we heard two things primarily. There's concern about built context, and there's concern about precedent. And these things, they kind of relate, they're intertwined. There's this idea that what happens with us will set the stage for what follows. And in fact, we agree with that. So we know that the densities that have been echoed by this community, 7 FAR along Atlantic Avenue, this is something that the Majority Leader Cumbo had memorialized in a letter to city planning. And we take her at her word that she's steering private applicants like ourselves the direction of your community board. The closest district to this proposed context is an R8A at 7.2 FAR, and so that is why we plan to adopt that as part of our rezoning. Our area, though, our application fits M-Crown because of that. We are, as anticipated by the M-Crown framework, a higher density commercial district that will yield significant affordable housing. Our application, by adopting an R8A district in part, will provide the step down concept that we see here on this map, the dark magenta to the lighter red. The corner of Atlantic and Vanderbilt is the only area in the M-Crown having received that designation from the city. And compared to other sites on Atlantic Avenue, more housing is appropriate here for all the reasons that we had previously discussed. There had been some talk about, well, why did the city draw the lines the way they did? The M-Crown framework distinction was neither random or related to ownership interest. The distinction was made for the reasons that we discussed, that it's on the wide street corner, it's closest to Atlantic Center, it's closest to the large buildings across the street, and the boundary is placed where it was, we believe, because it marks the edge of the continuation of Clinton Avenue, which is itself a busy vehicular exchange. So putting all this together, 3 blocks on the south side of Atlantic Avenue, referenced in the M-Crown framework, extend approximately half mile to Classen Avenue. 840 Atlantic occupies a mere 9% of that frontage. In keeping with the M-Crown call for this step down, we are trying in our revised proposal to establish that precedent moving forward for later applications. What are those later applications? So we saw in a prior presentation just recently by a few other developers, a pair of 17-story buildings, and they were bookending either end of this half-mile zone. We have a 17-story building near Classen Avenue and another 17-story building close to our site over towards Vanderbilt. If you were paying attention during these presentations, they had to misrepresent the size of our building. They showed our building at 250 feet tall. Whether this was intentional or not, it kind of doesn't matter. What the effect of showing our building at 250 feet does is it memorializes that same step down. If you're proposing a 175-foot building and you show it next to a 195-foot building, which is what we propose, there isn't much of a step down. So what they did was they showed the building at 250 feet, our building, in order to adhere to the M-Crown's step down dynamic. We saw this in a few places in the presentation. They showed our building again at 250 feet. They showed it at 25 stories in this image. Our building is 18 stories. Here it is again at 25 stories. These are images from their presentation. This is a misrepresentation of the scale of our building. Our building is shorter than this. Our building is 195 feet tall. So limiting the balance of Atlantic Avenue to 145 feet would strike a happy medium between the concern regarding built context and the opportunity here to maximize a greater housing supply at this ideal location. This is our proposal. We propose a touch more density at the corner, about 1 FAR blended, while limiting the balance of Atlantic Avenue to no more than 14 stories. And I imagine some of you are wondering, well, what does that look like? And how does this 840 Atlantic team, which is just a private applicant, really plan and propose to do this? So I bring us back to the image that we were shown by the other development team, where they again show us at 250 feet tall. We took this opportunity to pencil in their 17-story buildings. There they are, next to a misrepresentation of our building at 250 feet. We propose something different here. We propose that. We propose to bring them down and put us where we are at 195. I'm gonna show that again. This is what they showed. This is what we want to do. Again, how do we propose to do this? We propose to modify our rezoning proposal to rezone a portion of our site on the eastern edge to an R8A equivalent district. This would set a very strong precedent for limiting the balance of Atlantic Avenue to the east to a height no greater than 145 feet with a density no greater than R8A. And I would remind the team that we already kind of have this step down dynamic on Pacific. Our application has always proposed an R6B on Pacific Street. This revised framework, we believe, honors M-Crown's step down urban design framework for Atlantic Avenue, and again, achieves a balance between unlocking housing opportunity and respecting desired urban context. So this is what we propose. Again, our building stepping down to an R8A district on our eastern edge along Atlantic Avenue. We have other commitments, like we talked about. We commit to option 1 in response to the community's feedback, providing housing opportunity for local residents, and these affordable apartments would start as low as $900 a month for 2 bedrooms, the 40% AMI income band. As I know I'm treading over repeat territory here, we propose an 8,000 square foot arts-oriented community facility space. We're in the midst of negotiating a long-term lease with Jamel Gaines Creative Outlet, a local arts-oriented nonprofit. And in order to memorialize that community facility space for the long term, we propose a restrictive declaration to that effect. We also commit to hiring union 32BJ building service workers. And given everything that we have said, we asked this board, we've heard everything that's been said over the last couple months. Could you be supportive of this application if the rest of Atlantic Avenue is limited to 145 feet? Can you be okay with an additional approximately 1 FAR on the corner? That's the question that we want to leave to the board tonight. If just a 1 FAR more is on the corner, could you be supportive provided the rest of Atlantic Avenue is limited to 145 feet? Thank you very much, Ms. Tyus.
You're very welcome, Mr. Stark and Ms. Marazzi. Thank you for listening and actually hearing what we've been saying. I took some notes as you were speaking. You started speaking at 7:10 and you moved along. You did mention that the dance space would be leased in perpetuity. You used that word.
Not leased in perpetuity. We are engaged in a process or in a conversation with Mr. Gaines for a long-term lease, decades. But
let me rephrase. I'm making sure I understand. You're going to have the dance space, not that particular lessee, but it would be a dance space in perpetuity. That was the language you did use.
It would be a community. We're open to talking about this with the board, but our initial idea is a community facility space in perpetuity. So
okay.
That's
broad enough. That's broad enough. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm not going to torture you anymore on that. I just wanted to get the true depth and breadth of what you are offering. So Majority Leader Cumbo is very much devoted to the arts, and she's going to be very glad to hear that you have that level of sensitivity for the arts, that you would allow that type of community use in perpetuity in this building, should it be approved by the community. So at this point, I want to give Majority Leader Cumbo's representative, Lucian Allen, a chance to speak to this project as it's morphed. And we like the changes, I think. I know I do. Would love to see the background paperwork be brought up to what you're proposing now. So once Mr. Allen speaks, I'd like to give Vaconi to make his presentation and hopefully pull together a motion on this ULURP item. Mr. Lucian Allen, please.
Good evening, everyone. Dan Lucian Allen, working for Majority Leader Lori Cumbo. The changes to this project and development, again, to match as closely as possible to the tenants and the structure for an M Crown is, definitely what Majority Leader, would like to see. Again, understanding that she is a high proponent for affordable housing and also for the arts, and so an organization such as Jamel Gaines Creative Outlet to be in the community and offer jobs and just access to local residents is definitely something she is a proponent for as well. But again, the Majority Leader is still in steadfast to the tenets of the letter, 2018 letter to city planning, and is trying to definitely make sure that her views mirror what the community board wants as well. So as long as the community board is in favor of this, then the Majority Leader will be as well. Thank you.
Chair Tyus?
I was muted. I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Mr.
I do have a question, because there are some concerns in this chat. And we need to put our eye on this and give it some attention.
Okay.
But I do have a question. What is Mr. Vaconi presenting tonight?
He's
I
going
didn't know that was on the agenda.
Yes, he's going to present an analysis, propose a motion for this. We've been working up to this the last several months, many months. And so let's hear what he has to say. This has been shared with the, in one form or another, with the Land Use Committee as we move towards this presentation. So Mr. Vaconi, can you please proceed?
Sure. Before I get started, though, I would like to ask the former presenters one question, and that is, first of all, let me say I think that the addition of a restricted declaration to memorialize the use for the Arts Center is a positive addition to the proposal. I'd like to understand, is that the words community facility were used at the end. Are we talking about a restriction to any community facility, or will it be as specific as a use group that would represent the type Arts Center brings?
That's a great question. I'm not on mute, am I? No.
You're not on mute.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, there's only two community facility use groups, 3 and 4. That's a good first question. Like, what use group would Creative Outlet fall under? As a not-for-profit, I think it would be a non-for-profit institution without sleeping accommodation. But I mean, I would imagine that we would want to be open to a variety of non-for-profits that could occupy the space if decades from now, Creative Outlet outgrows it and goes elsewhere. I mean, the first thing I'll say is we plan to have Creative Outlet in this space for decades. So we are now talking about like the next tenant. And so this is the opportunity for everyone to talk about like how loose that non-for-profit limitation should be. Should it be only we would say that it would be a little too tight to say only non-for-profit arts. It might be better to be any non-for-profit community facility user, but again, this is the venue for us to talk about that.
Okay, okay, that's fine. And thanks for that clarification. I'm going to see if it's possible. It looks like I can just pop something up on the screen here for a second. So that's what I'm going to do. 1 second. I know that a number of you are probably familiar with some of the M-Crown background, but perhaps not everyone is. So I just wanted to start here. The M-Crown framework that DCP proposed to the community board in February of 2018 is made up of several different subzones. The community board affirmed an interest in that framework and then went on and talked about some densities that would be appropriate in those subzones through a letter sent to the Commissioner of City Planning from the majority leader and from the borough president. So commercial subzone, which includes the area of Atlantic Avenue where 840 Atlantic would be built, the community board identified an interest in FAR of 6 to 7 and the idea would be that additional one FAR would be preferential FAR for additional commercial uses. I'm not going to go through the other subzones. They're listed here, but I wanted also to mention that the community board's resolution that affirmed the framework and these densities also called for mapping MIH option 1, which is 25% of the residential units offered at an average of 60% AMI, or about $47,000 a year for a household of 3. Now, let me go on and talk about M-Crown relative to 840 Atlantic. The thing I want to point out here first is that while the proposed building is interesting, what we're really voting on is the zoning. And we have found out before through bitter experience in the M-Crown initiative that sometimes we do get a ULURP application and a zoning is proposed and a building is proposed. The zoning gets approved, but the building that gets built is not the building that was proposed. It's a different building.
Right.
And so we really need to be conscious when we're talking about the zoning, realizing that we're approving zoning, not a structure. It's not unknown that properties can change hands after the zoning is approved as well. So I want to just state that, not because I have any reason to suspect the applicant's intentions, but because we've been here before. So with respect to, as I mentioned before, CB8's M-Crown resolutions, we're looking for a 6 FAR in the commercial subzone around Atlantic Avenue from Vanderbilt to Classen, with an incentive bonus of 1 FAR for additional commercial use. The requested zoning in the 840 Atlantic Avenue application is C63X. That's a total of 9.7 FAR with a 6 maximum for commercial. My next line here is not correct. It does not require the first floor of non-residential use. And although we've heard that the applicants have stated a desire to use less than the maximum amount of FAR, until this evening, where I guess we're talking about splitting the zoning between C62a and C63X, the requested zoning would enable the entire access to the entire 9.7 FAR. So if we were looking to make this, in my view, this is again my personal view, the community board should be looking to bring this as close into compliance with the M-Crown vision as possible. It's just, the reason for it is very simple. We've spent a lot of time on the neighborhood rezoning. We have other developers waiting in the wings. Each one of them is going to have good reasons why their project should have some additional FAR above what the community board and the elected officials has specified. It puts us in just a very difficult position if we start going down the road of looking for all of these different justifications and having to be responsive to them, especially at this point, given that this ULURP application will most likely go to the city council in the term of, and future applications will go to the city council potentially after the election and after a new administration is sworn in. So with that in mind, I think there are three potential ways we could look at this. One of them is, could we have the applicant withdraw and instead file this as a text amendment that would create the zoning district we need for M-Crown? This is something that we have so far not been able to accomplish with the Department of City Planning, but I think would be in the community board's interest if a private applicant was willing to do this. And that would be to create a variation of the existing C61 zoning district that would require a non-residential ground floor consistent with a special enhanced commercial district. And that new district would have a base FAR of 6 and an incentive FAR of 1 for non-residential use. So that I think would be ideal, although it's somewhat onerous for the applicant who'd have to take those lots out of the Atlantic Avenue lots out of the application and refile. If that turned out to be too onerous for the applicant, we could talk about the idea of creating a C62a zoning that would give us the FAR that the community board proposed, and look for the applicant to limit the residential use to 4.6 FAR. That would free up about again, my number should be 2.6 FAR for non-residential use, and so that gets us close again to that incentive FAR for additional non-residential. But if that's not of interest either to the applicant, we could also recommend that the city rezone the area to C45D, which does have a required non-residential first floor use, but only 30 feet from the street wall, but it is a requirement, and it would allow for 5.6 FAR. All of these would be MIH rezonings, and so we would look to have an MIH option, presumably with the deepest affordability possible. So looking at this, and this is just illustrative, but comparing this idea of as of right residential, some type of agreed upon limited residential, and the idea of required and optional non-residential, this is how M-Crown, how the current application, and how the options I've just outlined would compare. This is M-Crown 7 FAR with two non-residential floors. This is the proposed application C63X 9.7 FAR with an optional non-residential first floor. The first option I described before, that is creating a new zoning district or filing a text amendment, would look a lot like M-Crown and would be applicable to the rest of the row on Atlantic Avenue. That would immediately open up the potential for a lot of additional residential density along Atlantic Avenue down to Classen. Option number 2 would take care of the developer's lot here, but would not give us anything more in terms of a tool that could be used further in that subzone. This all would be subject to an agreement limiting the residential FAR. So that would give us sort of a total of 7.2 with close to 3 floors, probably 3 floors of non-residential use. And then finally, the C45D option would give us a building like this, where we had some required ground floor non-residential for an active streetscape, and 5.6 FAR for residential for the rest of that project. So the way that would look here, this is the area that we've been talking about here with these 3 different options along Atlantic Avenue, lots 1, part of lot 1, 9, and 10. Personally, I would favor rezoning the lots on Pacific Street to align with the neighboring zoning districts. So in the case of Vanderbilt Avenue, that would indicate an R7A C14 overlay, which is what Vanderbilt Avenue is zoned at up to this point. And on Pacific Street, it would indicate an R6B zoning for these lots, 68, 69, and part of lot 1. I believe that there is a bar for private applicants to clear jumping ahead of the neighborhood rezoning to file a private application. I think part of that is something that the presenters have addressed here tonight, the idea of a binding commitment for floor area for the Arts Center that would take the form of a restrictive declaration. I think there would probably need to be some form of enforcement involved in that as well, an agreement for enforcement. But I would also want to see the use fairly narrowly defined for the arts. If we're saying this is going to be an arts center, then it really should be an arts center, and it should be an arts center forever. Not a community facility, which is a very broad definition. A community facility could be a doctor's office or a daycare center. If this is going to be an arts center, then it should stay an arts center. With respect to affordable housing, this is another area that's extremely important to this community. The proposal is to map at MIH option 2, which is an 80% AMI. AMI right now for New York City is a little over $100,000 a year for a family of 3. So that's an income requirement of about the proposal is for an average income of around $80,000. The community board has always favored MIH option 1, and in this instance, since we are again jumping ahead of the community rezoning, I would look for MIH option 3 and to be mapped in addition to MIH option 1. MIH option 3 can't be mapped on its own. And again, look for a commitment from the developer to offer the affordable housing under option 3, which provides for deeper affordability. I want to make just a side comment about affordability. When we began putting together the financial models for M-Crown about 5 years ago, the median income in Community District 8 was about 60% AMI. In those 5 years, because of the intense gentrification that's happening in Community District 8, the median income in Community District 8 is actually more like 80% AMI now. So we're really, really experiencing a steep rise in income from new people, new residents displacing existing residents. And what that says to me is we have to go deeper on affordability in order to retain the residents under community preference that we're otherwise likely losing to displacement pressure. That's all that I have on that presentation.
Thank you, Gib. Thank you. That was very helpful. So now we see a lot in the chat, and I would ask Ms. Weatherspoon to curate some questions from the audience, from the community members, and questions and comments from.
Ms. Dias, can I clear up a few misrepresentations made about our project? I think it would only be right that Mr. Vicconi shows us as a 20-story building when we're an 18-story building. He says that we're 9.7 FAR when we are only about 8.2 once we include the proposal that we shared with you tonight.
Okay.
Mr. Vicconi points out that Atlantic Avenue should be 7 FAR, and that's what we're trying to.
Mr. Stark, I think we spoke earlier, and you had an opportunity to send your new material ahead.
Oh, I will circulate it around I can circulate it now if people would like to see it. But
please send a copy to the audience and to the office, and we will make sure it gets out to the committee and to the full board.
It's a little hurtful because Mr. Vicconi likes to say that M-Crown established that the upper limit on FAR would be 6 or 7 FAR along Atlantic Avenue, and that's exactly what we propose to do. Through our application,
I truly wish we had your revision earlier, to share it earlier. Most of the people on this committee work during the day. Okay, so we need more than a couple of hours advance notice. Here, we don't even have that. I appreciate your changes, and I'm sure once they've had a chance to digest it, the audience will appreciate some of the changes you've made as well.
May I have the floor for 60 seconds?
Let's do some memory testing here and see if we can get some cogent questions and same kind of answers from you on what you presented tonight. Let's stick with that. I'm sure Mr. Vacconi will come up with updated comments as we step through this. So everyone, it's 7:45. Buckle your seatbelts. Let's get with it. Question.
What I'm gonna do, instead of just reading the questions, I'm gonna have the people ask their own questions. So
Yeah.
in this order, it will be
Madam
Lisa
Chair?
Atkins. Hello?
Madam Chair?
Speaking, I'm
Hello?
sorry, Ms. Weatherspoon is speaking. Go ahead.
Ms. Weatherspoon, just one quick question. So the community is going to ask questions before community board members. Community board members can ask questions after the community. Is that what we're doing tonight?
That's standard ops, Mr. Puka. Yes. Okay.
So these are the questions from the community in this order: Lisa Atkinson, Josiane Lysius, and Will Thomas. Thank you.
Okay, my question was, what was the rates for like the income levels? Because a lot of these affordable housing is, like I said, 10 to 15% is really low income. And you have a lot of people that work for the city that work in, and we're considered moderate income. And a lot of the homes that are built, we're left out of. So you have a lot of us that are city residents that have lived there all our lives. And there may be, like you said, maybe 15, 20 apartments for low income. And then you have the high luxury people making over 150. I have a child. I can't afford to pay $4,000 for an apartment that they're building in my neighborhood for a 2-bedroom. So what happens to me is that I leave where I grew up at, where I leave the neighborhoods because these are type of units. So what are your plans to also increase, like literally have affordable housing for all, not just low income and the luxury higher income people? What about the people in the middle? So is there any plans for that at this location?
Absolutely. I'm going to turn it over to Tom Lee in just a second, but who's our project developer. But I will first say that the way that MIH works is it takes this idea into consideration by breaking the affordable housing units into a series of AMI tranches. So what I had shown on the screen earlier tonight was the 40% AMI tranche that for a 2-bedroom apartment would start at $900 a month. But there are other tranches. So Tom, do you have some of those rents starting?
Yeah, so with the 40% AMI slice out of the option 1, we have some 2-bedrooms that are going to start at $900 or less than $900 actually per month, which I think is much more affordable than the $4,000 per month example. 1-bedroom, roughly $700. And for the entire 25% affordable units, the blended to 60% AMI, which is for 2-bedroom is roughly $1,350, $1,360 per month. And we have for the whole building 25%, which is roughly 90 units, give or take, that are low income.
That's still not covering moderate income, but thank you for trying to answer my question.
But we do also have, at a prior presentation, Tom talked about just where even our market rate units are going to start. Right now, our market rate units are proposed to start in the 3s. I know that's not quite moderate income, but it's just giving you a sense that this is not a super luxury product. This is not $6,000 a month apartments. This is not that.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Ben just said, we've had to recognize the market declines in the recent few quarters. $3,000, the number Ben just referenced, is probably the overall average for the market rate portion. There are certain units, especially the studios, 1-bedrooms, are going to be starting lower than those levels, even without the AMI restrictions. So we do have a variety of apartments that are affordable to different income levels.
That's still not what you're saying. $3,000 for studios and apartments are still kind of high. But like I said, thank you for trying to answer the question.
Thank you. Who's next, Ms. Weatherspoon? Next questioner. Who is next with the questions?
Will Thomas.
Thank you.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Beautiful. So hi, everyone. My name is Will Thomas. I'm here to support the project as a representative of Open New York. We're an independent grassroots pro-housing organization. We support it because we think that adding more homes here will help to alleviate New York's housing shortage and also help to fight displacement here and in other neighborhoods. I want to ask a question for the community board. Are you guys willing to accept a proposal for the community that goes beyond M-Crown if it gives more benefits for the neighborhood at large? Homelessness has reached the highest level since the 1930s. And I think that in this environment, we need every bit of affordable housing we can muster. And the 95 below market units that this rezoning offers, it strikes me as a great place to start. You know, I feel like if we start talking about reducing densities, you're likely going to get to a situation where there are less, affordable units, less market rate units, less housing. And I just want to make sure that those considerations are being considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. What we look for is a good mix of housing and living wage jobs that you can walk to. So there's a trick to getting that all together in one place. Next questioner, Ms. Weather.
Alexia Nazarian.
Oh, hi. I was just, forgive me if you covered this, but I was curious how many units were lost as a result of reducing the height of the building?
Thank you for asking that question. Right now, we've only, first off, we're reducing the FAR, but I mean, this is, 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other. But we have not fully determined exactly how much of our property we would rezone to R8A. We are presenting this idea to the community board because we think it solves one of the major comments that came out of this community planning process, which is how do we ensure that the balance of Atlantic Avenue is limited to the FARs that Mr. Vicconi keeps describing. He keeps saying that the upper limit is 6 or 7 FAR. So what we've done is we've established an R8A district on our property such that any future developer would be hard pressed to zone higher than that. So we believe that we are actually not only putting an application forward that's in keeping with M-Crown, but helping this community set a framework for future developments. So I know your question is how many units did we lose? It's unclear right now. We haven't designed the new building, but we want to hear from this community whether or not this idea to kind of set the precedent for what follows is something that they'd be willing to listen to.
Got it. And for what it's worth, I support the project. I wish it were bigger and had more units. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nazarian.
We have Elizabeth. And then Tim. Elizabeth, can you unmute?
Sorry, one question I did have from earlier is you're saying that this is like a commitment. How firm of a commitment is all this? Or how legally binding is it in terms of you're saying you're changing the height of the building and things like that?
It would be very, very much a commitment because for the application to proceed, for the building to proceed, it has to be receive the blessing of your council member, majority leader, Lori Cumbo. Her representatives are here, they're listening to this, and we take Councilmember Cumbo out of her word that unless this community is relatively supportive of the project that we put before it, we're not going to get approved. So it's going to be binding because, for lack of a better way to put it, she's going to make it binding.
Okay, thank you, Tim.
I just wanted to express disappointment with the shrinking of this and the lowering of the FAR and the precedent that will set for not allowing enough homes in the neighborhood.
We appreciate that. We're trying to be responsive to this community's goal to limit the balance of Atlantic Avenue to about a 7 FAR. So our application, by adopting a 7 FAR district on a chunk of the site, will will in a way create a kind of an upper ceiling on what could follow to the east. The Atlantic Avenue is a long stretch. It's over a half a mile. Our area represents a mere 8 to 9%. We think that one extra FAR, give or take, at the corner, adjacent to some 300-foot tall buildings, is an appropriate place to achieve a bit more of an opportunity. There's a bit of an opportunity here. Mr. Vicconi is throwing out numbers like 4.5 FAR, 5.5 FAR. I'm gonna remind everyone that in the East New York rezoning, about 40 minutes east of here, they have 7.2 FAR. So I'm trying to wrap my head around why we're permitting affordable housing capacity in areas where we don't really have as much opportunity, and yet we are hand-wringing over a single FAR, a 10-minute walk from a train station where people can access thousands upon thousands of jobs. I'm sorry, I find it to be a bit, I think we're splitting hairs a little bit when we're shovel ready. We're ready to build some housing.
Next.
Okay, Ben Rodder. Please unmute.
It took me a moment to get to the mute button. Hi, I just wanted to ask, we're hearing a lot about context and keeping things similar to buildings around it, but as some of my fellow commenters have mentioned, there's a real housing shortage in this city, and I just moved to the neighborhood. I'm lucky enough to have a good salary, and my partner is. I moved because I'm going to be a healthcare provider in the neighborhood, and it was really hard to find housing in our budget that fits our lifestyle because of how expensive things are getting. The best way to get out of that would be more units. So I'd ask the board why they're focused on context over the ability to create as many units as possible to help keep the prices low.
Well, I'm sorry. What's your name again?
This is Ben
My
Rodder
name's
speaking.
Ben Rodder. Okay. You have to note that even DCP will tell us, if we listen closely, that there's a 10-year absorption rate for projects like this, meaning that it will take 10 years for all of the projects of the dwelling units that would go into this building to be completely rented in general. In general, keep that in mind, that the investors are not going to reduce their expected return on investment to meet the demands for low-income housing. We have to do that as a group, and that is not what's happening here. Okay, Mr. Stark and Ms. Marazzi will tell you straight up that to get this rezoning, they're going to do as few low income, very low income, quote unquote, affordable units as possible, because they've already promised their lenders a certain return on investment. And if they start changing the rental rates, they won't be able to meet those expectations. So we as a group need to get ahead of this process of planning in a vacuum, okay, so that when the builders and the developers come to the table, they recognize the basic needs that we have for society. Now, we don't want to build a bunch of dwelling units and then there's no jobs nearby. You're just creating another mess. Okay, so we need to have living wage jobs within walking distance. That's the plan here. Are there other questions?
Salvatore Franchino.
Hi, thanks for your time. Yeah, I do have a quick question, and I do support this project. I think affordable housing is needed. I think market rate housing is needed because I'm well off enough. I don't want to have to compete for scraps with people who are less fortunate than me, because ultimately I'm unfortunately going to have to win in that case, and I don't want to have to compete with that. So I do think that projects like this that allow affordable housing for lower income folks is a good way to make sure that we're not competing over super scarce resources like housing. And because housing is so scarce, and I know that there is a lot of parking proposed with this engagement, or not engagement, this project, I was wondering if it's possible to lower the number of parking spaces that will be constructed, because I think it was something like 90. And there's also a climate crisis, not just a housing crisis. So more homes would be better, less parking would be cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question. we agree, but we're restricted by the zoning. If we were in the Manhattan core, then you don't have to build any parking for new residential. But outside of the Manhattan core, the market rate component of the building will generate a parking requirement of 40%, 40%, 40 or 50. So we just can't change that, unfortunately. Lobby your council members and your elected officials to change parking requirements.
It sounds like this M Crown zoning isn't very respectful of the environment with these parking requirements.
That's not M Crown. That is the current zoning. Okay,
Oh,
listen
okay.
closely.
My bad.
Who's next? Who's next?
Question: what is the square footage that you're looking to dedicate to Creative Outlet, and what is the rent, the lease will be, and the tenure of that lease?
So our project developer, Mr. Lee, has been the one negotiating with Creative Outlet. So I'm going to hand it off to him.
In terms of rent, we're talking about a number that's approximately $10 per year. $10 per year, yeah, per square foot. And in terms of duration, we're thinking about a 10 plus 10 plus 10, where Creative Outlet has the option and the flexibility to stay long enough to grow as an organization. And if they're able to outgrow this space, they have the flexibility to kind of pass on the space to another nonprofit, similar use that we're hoping for. But if Creative Outlet wants to be there for as long as they want, we're perfectly happy to have them.
Okay. So what is the square footage that you are looking to dedicate to that organization?
We have a design for approximately 8,000 square foot, slightly above that.
Okay, so that $10 per square foot, are you expecting to have escalations through the lifetime of that lease?
Yeah, very modest escalations, kind of keeping track with inflation.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions from community members?
That's it.
Okay,
No, this is Miss Collins.
Oh, hi,
Excuse
Miss
me.
Collins.
Hi,
Yeah,
I
I
raised my
didn't see
hand
you.
because I that's okay.
I'm sorry.
We're just
Because-
about to go to committee members, Ms. Collins.
Yeah, I just needed clarity on what he, I think the last person who spoke, when he mentioned the amount of the rent, it wasn't clear what he said. I didn't hear it well. Could you repeat that, please?
It's $10 per square foot. So we're talking about 8,000 square foot community facility space, which becomes $80,000 per year for an organization that's, to my understanding, has an annual budget that's over $1 million. So, we're trying to make sure it's a reasonable amount that's sustainable for Creative Outlet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next would be questions from committee members.
This is Mr. Puka speaking. Are we going in order or just people just?
You go ahead, Mr. Puka. You can go right ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
The presenters said that this, would set a precedent for the rest of Atlantic Avenue, but there's no, that's basically saying, there's no legally binding way to get other developers to agree to that lower FAR along Atlantic Avenue. There has to be some sort of something that's binding that. Otherwise, what is the guarantee that people will follow, the model that you're presenting?
It's a fair question. So in our experience, working with the city does not zone sawtooth. They don't, if they're up here at the corner and then they go down towards the mid-block, they're not going to immediately go back up. The applications that you saw as discussion items in the last a month ago proposed R9A as their chosen zoning district, and so the city would be really hard pressed to, from a land use rationale perspective, to zone one thing at the corner, dip down to the mid block, and then pop back up. It would in effect, they don't do that, and so in effect it would set the precedent at R8A moving east. Interestingly, they will, however, continue down
There's nothing to stop the city, at least based on how they've been zoning for the last 20 years, from continuing to a lesser density, but they're not going to go back to R9A after dipping to R8A from the corner towards the mid block. But yeah.
John Buckholz, would you like to make a comment?
I would just say that I very strongly support the application.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't see any more questions in the chat or hands raised.
Thank
So
you, Ms. Weatherspoon.
that's it. Yep.
Oh, this is good. Thank you all for putting your minds to this and taking a close look. At this point, I would say we have exhausted questions for the moment. This will go, whatever we decide here, will go to the full board on the 13th and then to the borough president's hearing, which I believe is the 17th. So we're not done with this. And from what we saw earlier, for Speaker Johnson's proposal, the questions that are coming from this audience fit well into that early intervention, with the exception that the community board's role in that new paradigm would still be advisory. So 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. At this point, I have to ask for a motion from the committee members, from a committee member to vote on this ULURP item. When we report it to the full board for ratification of the committee's recommendation, you either approve, disapprove, approve with modifications or conditions, or disapprove with modifications or conditions. So that's the kind of language I would like to hear in a motion from a committee member at this point.
Ms. Tyus, I'd like to make a motion on this application, and I'd like to just preface this by saying, and for the benefit of those folks attending who perhaps are not familiar with what the community board's been working on over the last 6 years now, the developers, the applicants here, began meeting with the Department of City Planning in 2018, and I'm going to, at this point, for the record, state that the Department of City Planning has told us they counseled the developers to meet with us early on. Those things that did not happen, and it's unfortunate that we're at this point where we're talking about an application and talking about issues, and some of the ones that Mr. Stark has raised about the idea of setting precedents and using a step down to the east to help use that. You know, all of these things could have been discussed by these applicants and by the Department of City Planning with the community board over any time in the last 3 years. And it would have been a perfectly good conversation to have. But right now we have, there's a tremendous amount of pressure that's been built up by the fact that the neighborhood rezoning has been so long delayed. It's fueled a speculative market in the properties in the M-Crown zone, which harms everyone. It reduces the potential for affordability and for cross subsidy for manufacturing, which is what we've been looking for. So to entertain this stuff now, you know, as much as I admire the creativity of the team in presenting this, I just think it's really too late. We've spent a lot of time building community support for residential upzoning in Brooklyn, and that is not something many community boards do, and we don't want to lose it. And we will bring along our community support if we do the thing that we've said we were going to be doing all along. If we start to deviate from that, we may not have that support anymore. And we're also very conscious about needing to work with whoever the next city council member is in the rest of this rezoning process. And we do not want to create you know, a neighborhood schism at this moment in time. It just doesn't make any sense, and it's not worth the risk, not to us and not to future applicants either. So With that in mind, I'm going to propose the following motion. I circulated a draft of this earlier today to the members of the Land Use Committee. The language I'm going to use now is slightly different based on Ms. Tyus's guidance here at the beginning of this, at the beginning of her introduction here. And this is what I would like to move. With respect to the applications C210249ZMK and N210250ZRK by Vanderbilt Holdings, Inc., regarding a proposed rezoning of block 1122 lots 1, 9, 10, 68, 69, 70, and 71, the committee recommends the board deny support until the following conditions are met. Number one, that in lieu of the proposed C63X district, lots 70 and 71 be rezoned R7A with a C14 overlay matching the zoning on the blocks to the south on Vanderbilt Avenue. Two, that in lieu of the proposed C63X district, lots 68 and 69 in the portion of lot 1 fronting Pacific Street be rezoned R6B, matching the zoning on the lots to the east on Pacific. Three, that in lieu of the proposed C63X district for the remainder of lot 1, as well as lots 9 and 10, the following action be taken. A, the applicant removes these lots from its application and files a zoning text amendment to create a contextual variation of the existing C61 zoning district with required non-residential frontage, consistent with the regulations of the special enhanced commercial district, with a base FAR of 6 and incentive FAR of 1 for non-residential use. B, if A is not possible, in lieu of the proposed district, the applicant makes a binding commitment subject to the establishment of C62a zoning to restrict residential use on the lots to 4.6 FAR. C, if B is not possible, the lots be rezoned to C45D. Number four, that all lots be mapped to MIH options 1 and 3, and that the applicant make a binding commitment to offer the required affordable units under MIH option 3. And number five, that the applicant make a binding commitment to restrict the use of 8,000 square feet to use group 9A limited to studios, the latter to ensure a permanent facility for a dance studio. That is my motion.
Thank you, Mr. Bocconi. We need a second. We need a second to get the motion on the floor for a vote.
That's a very complicated motion. Is it possible to understand how the developer reacts to it? Because it's a lot of words, and I don't know how to judge it if I don't know how the developer feels about it.
I think what we're doing, I'm sorry, I'm speaking. Who was that asked that question?
John Buckles.
Mr. Buckles, okay. What we're doing here is putting a motion on the floor for the appointed and public committee members to vote on. Would you like to have the motion recited again? The applicant is not a voting member of the committee at this point.
Skip has put that in the chat. He just put it in the chat.
I understand. And I'm not trying to be difficult. The motion is a lot of words that even if I read them will be over my head. And you know, if it's not possible, it's not possible. But
no, it was emailed to the committee, to the Google group for the committee.
But
correct Mr. Bocconi, did you email it to the committee?
Yes, but the basic point, all I'm trying to say is that if it's creating a situation that the developer feels is a binary that they can't meet, then that would affect people's vote. But if we're not going to do it, I'm not going to argue about it.
Okay, it's nothing to argue. Let me try to help you understand what's happening here. There is a timeline here. Mr. Stark, Mr. Marazzi, Tom Lee, the rest of the group, and Vanderbilt Holdings, they have time to think about what we've been talking about and what we're about to vote on. This is not over. It's not over. They can go back and digest it and decide what they're going to do and come back.
Okay. Ms. Tice, if I might just add a clarification for Mr. Buckles' question.
Please do.
This motion sets out a series of options. It's not a it's not a single track proposal. We lay out an option for the developer. Our first option is that the developer refile for a zoning text amendment. If they don't want to do that, a second option is to rezone to C62a and make a commitment to limit FAR. And then number three, if they're not willing to do that, then we recommend a zoning of C45D. So we're not making a one way or the other. You know, we end up with a direction for the Atlantic Avenue lots.
So we would have some sort of feedback from the proponents by next Thursday at our full board meeting. In the meantime, we can look at voting on what's on the floor now, unless and if it fails, we'll make another motion. We can go at this.
Okay, Ms. Tice, I'm sorry. Kathy Iceland has been trying to speak. I never did, so I apologize, Kathy, because I didn't see your hand. I think she's put a proposal, but please give her an opportunity to speak. Go ahead, Kathy.
Hi. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get a motion on the floor.
Yes, the motion has.
And
And
I
she
didn't
has.
get, I'm sorry, Ms. Weatherspoon. I didn't get the motion on the floor. Once we get the motion on the floor, we can take it apart and put it back together again. Is there a second for this motion?
I second.
Thank you. Now we can go into the questions.
May I ask my question? This is Kathy Islin.
Yes, please.
Okay, I just have a question about the last point, which states that the space ensure a permanent facility for a dance studio. I'm not familiar with the use group, but could that use group be an art space rather than restricted to a dance studio? That seems very restrictive.
Yes, it could be another art. It's a studio basically. It could be a different type of art studio, but it would have to be a studio.
Okay. Thank you.
In other words, performing arts. So we have a second. We have a motion and a second.
Or visual arts.
It could be visual arts.
Visual arts or film studio, but a studio space.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, performing, visual, we can work that out. I think the main thing is that it's arts, that we have something to nourish the soul and the spirit in the neighborhood. So at this point, unless there are other questions on the motion that's on the floor, I think we need to call the roll.
Peter Crashes has a friendly amendment.
Mr. Crassus, you're muted. You're talking, you're muted. We can't hear you. Unmute yourself. Peter, you're still muted. Turn up the volume on your device. Bottom right. Oh, okay. There's a little icon, looks like a speaker, on the very bottom of your screen on the right. There you go.
Okay. I think I was answered. I was suggesting using the term creative sector for item number 5.
That's fine. That's fine.
Creative sector.
I accept that as a friendly amendment.
Okay.
Sarah Lazar, do you have a question?
Yeah, I guess this was similar to Mr. Buckholtz's question about, I mean, do we know, if the developer wants to comment about what they think of these potential terms?
At this point, I'm sorry, Ms. Lazar, that's not the way this is going to work.
Okay. And then I guess my other question was, do we know what Councilmember Cumbo thinks of this proposal? I mean, I guess Councilmember Cumbo said that she would support a proposal that fits within the M-Crown guidelines. Okay, maybe. I don't know if we know more about what Ms. Cumbo has said about the various possible outcomes of all this.
Can I answer that?
Yes, Mr. Lucian Allen, yes.
What I was saying is that the majority leader would love to see this application meet the requirements of M-Crown, but ultimately Majority Leader is going to be following the wishes of CB8 because she is going to be mirroring her support, or I guess lack thereof, or essentially just mirroring what the viewpoint of the community board and what decision that has been voted upon.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. This segment of this community district was left out of the Crown Heights West rezoning, and it's sat there and floundered and moldered all these years since that time because no one wanted to put any money in. And we still can't get the public realm improvements that would be part of the neighborhood rezoning, even with this process that Vanderbilt Holdings is putting itself through. So we have to come up with a better way. We need to tweak Johnson's vision to see if we can get more power to make sure that these kinds of delays don't happen. We need housing for low and very low income people, and they need to be able to work near where they live. Okay, not have to travel an hour and a half, an hour, 45 minutes to get to a $15 an hour job. Okay, so anyway, moving along, we have a motion on the floor that needs to be voted on. So we had started a roll call, I believe. Let's restart it, please.
Albert Appleton,
Yes.
Princess Ben James, Princess Ben James, unmute if you have to. John Buckholz,
No.
Janet Collins,
Yes.
Nora Daniel,
Yes.
Evan Farley,
Yes.
Najani Granville,
Yes.
Kathy Iceland,
Yes.
Jazima Jordan,
Yes. Yeah, I gotta see again. Yes.
Thank you. Peter Crassus,
Yes.
Sarah Lazar,
Yes.
Sherry Norton, Fior Ortiz,
Yes.
Robert Puka,
Yes.
Ethel Tyus,
Yes.
Gib Bacone,
Yes.
Sharon, Irsa Weatherspoon, yes. Sharon Weatherburn,
Abstain.
Deborah Young.
No.
Okay. We have 14 yeses. And I'm sorry, 2 noes and 1 abstention.
Thank you, Ms. Weatherspoon. The motion passes. So it will go to the full board next Thursday and then to the borough president's office on the 17th. And I thank you for your time. I think we're getting close to having some real progress here. And I hope to see something, maybe we can see something before the full board meeting, I don't know. The next part of our agenda for the evening is a revisitation of the DCP presentation on accessibility. Zoning for accessibility is a text amendment. I think we do have a member of DCP staff in the audience. Mr. Jonah Rogoff, I'm not sure if he has any colleagues with him. Jonah, I think you were at the joint EST Land Use Committee meeting on April 27th. Do you want to do a really brief recap?
Sure. Thanks, Ms. Tyus. This is regarding zoning for accessibility.
Yes.
Or the, okay. Yeah, so I can just say that it's a proposal that was referred out. It's not technically a ULURP proposal, but it follows a similar path. And the ultimate goal is to support transit accessibility at stations system-wide. And it kind of has two main components. One is a required transit easement within 50 feet of all subway stations. So that essentially means that whenever a development occurs that's more than on a site greater than 5,000 square feet, they would be required to consult with the city planning department as well as the MTA to confirm whether or not a transit easement volume is necessary. And the MTA is allocated a lot of funding for transit improvements. The one at Grand Army Plaza is a great example for that. So we're just looking at more opportunities near stations on privately owned sites to incorporate subway stair entrances or elevators. And then the second part of the proposal, which doesn't directly relate to CB8, but just as a flag, in higher density districts, R9 and R10 districts that are within 500 feet of a subway station, they would be allowed to have a zoning floor area bonus of 20% if they provide a station or a transit easement volume or a major improvement. And I'm happy to share the details of the proposal. There's a lot of technical aspects of it, and the subway improvement bonus also would be a CPC or City Planning Commission authorization. So it would be, the community board wouldn't have a formal review like ULURP, but it would be circulated similar to like a fresh bonus application. But again, this is, except for downtown Brooklyn, there's really no other parts of CB8 this would apply to. Parts of Brooklyn, I mean.
Thank you, Mr. Rogoff. Now, I want to remind committee members that the materials were distributed prior to last month's joint meeting, and they were included in the materials that were sent around for this meeting. So I hope you did get a chance to take a close look. My recollection is that with the implementation of the elevator at the Brooklyn Museum, we have an elevator at Eastern Parkway and Utica. We've got the elevator at Nostrand and Atlantic. I'm not sure where else we can plug in this wonderful concept of allowing people to have an easier access to the subway, whether above or below ground. But at this point, I have to assume that you did get a chance to look at the materials, and I ask for a motion.
There's a question. Yeah, what's the downtown part of CB8, or did I mishear you? This is Peter Crash is asking.
Yes, hi, Peter. This is, sorry, I misspoke. This would just apply to downtown Brooklyn, so CB2.
Okay. Thank you for that. I still want to go on the record for this community district. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? We might need another building on Nostrand Avenue and Eastern Parkway. Who knows? I ask for a motion. Anybody home? Hello.
Can I just ask a question? Do we have an advisory role? This is I guess this is a citywide ULURP. Is that right, Jonah?
No, this is not ULURP.
Not ULURP, but you do have an advisory role. So for all intents and purposes, it's the same. You're just not required to hold a public hearing like a regular ULURP application.
Okay, I'm getting the feeling like people want to be heard, and then when they realize they have an audience, they don't have anything to say. What is going on here? Now's the time to speak up. We've seen this a couple of times. Does anybody have an opinion about this proposal from city planning? For those among us who are in wheelchairs, on crutches, et cetera, how do they get around? They have to hop 3 or 4 stations down to come down on an elevator and then go on a bus and whatever. If you were like that, what would you want? Speak up. I need a motion. I'm shocked and appalled. What's going on out there? Are
What
you
is
okay?
and is there a deadline on the community board's clock for a response? Jonah?
Yes, thanks, Gib. It's April 14th, I believe. So you have a little time, or sorry, not June 14th. Excuse me.
So we will have another land use meeting before this happens, and June 14th is going to probably be tight for a general meeting of the community board.
Hello.
No, we'll have that too. We'll have them both. We'll have a land use meeting and a general meeting. So I mean, I'm sorry, I don't want to frustrate the chair of the committee here in making this motion, but I might move that we table since it doesn't sound like there is a motion forthcoming, and we have opportunity to pass a resolution before the deadline.
We tabled it at environmental sanitation and transportation. They will vote on it at their next meeting towards the end of May.
Okay, so we won't lose anything at all then, because that way the general meeting will have both we'll have EST and land use recommendations.
So what's happening here is that people are not doing their homework. You're getting reading assignments and nobody's reading the material. It's shameful. And then you have the nerve to complain that nobody listens. You're not saying anything. That's a problem. Okay, so don't create your own problems. I won't say we have to vote to table, but I think Gib is putting that motion on the floor. A move to table. He needs a second.
We'll second that.
Second.
I'll do a show of hands. You know how to raise your hand? Raise your Mickey Mouse hand on the thing there. And so are there any
or perhaps ask for objections?
Are there any objections to tabling? Maybe that's the simplest way to do it. Nope. Hearing none, I say pronounce this tabled, and we will bring this up at the first Thursday in June. And we will summarily deride anyone who hasn't read the materials by then, because that'll be the first. Thank you all. I think we have a member in the audience, Ms. Hapgood from ISCP.
Yes.
Just to describe her work and her organization. Ms. Hapgood, would you want to say a few words?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you very, very much. This has been an incredible meeting to watch, I have to say. I just wanted to introduce the organization that I'm a director of, because we are an arts nonprofit, and we are right now on the edge of Bushwick, and we are looking to move, and the Brooklyn Borough President's Office told us about the M Crown development. And so I just wanted to introduce myself to the community and the community board. Very briefly, we support the professional development of artists and curators who come to our organization from all around the world. We are obviously extremely international, and we are also quite diverse. We have people coming from Africa. We have residencies dedicated only to people of color from the US, from New York City, and from curatorial residencies for people from the global South. Anyway, so we are a very international and diverse organization. We have studios. Right now we have 35 studios where we are. Our mission is to support all of the artists and curators that come to us, but also to introduce New York audiences to exceptional international art practices that, as Ms. Tyus said, nourish the soul and the spirit. I thought that was a really great characterization. And also our mission, a third mission point, is to engage local communities through public programs that enrich the appreciation and understanding of contemporary art. So we organize exhibitions and talks, and we have open studios 3 times a year. We attract adult audiences. We bring footfall, we bring business to neighborhoods. Right now, as I said, we're in North Brooklyn on the edge of Bushwick. We qualify as a community use facility. We also qualify as light manufacturing. And depending on the real estate ownership structure, we are exempt from paying real estate taxes. People do not live in our spaces, they work in them. And there could be a lot of good synergies. And so I'm here just to say, we are looking to move. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and I would welcome the opportunity to talk to anybody who's interested.
Could you please repeat the name of your organization?
Sure. It's the International, it's complicated, International Studio and Curatorial Program. And shorthand, it's ISCP. And we are a 27-year-old organization.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Thank you.
So I think that we have concluded our business for the evening. And unless there's something else anybody else wants to bring up at this point in time, I ask for a motion to close the meeting.
So moved.
Motion to close.
Thank you all, and see you next Thursday.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Ethel.
Thank you, Ethel.
Ethel.